Really good to see everybody. Hello. Happy New Year. Happy 2026. Wild. Time moves fast, doesn't it? 2026, huh? Um, Hope everyone had a good holiday season. I know holidays can be difficult for some, others not so much, but yeah, mine was good. Mostly full of joy and happiness and cooked for some friends on Christmas, which I love doing. Cooking is a huge hobby for me. Um, I did come sort of face to face with some emotional kind of stuff around my mom, who, she's all that's left of my direct family. And yeah, we're not especially close at the moment. And it did bring up some things, which yeah, which was, it is what it is. And on New Year's, I did a DMT experience, which was really good. I actually did a couple of them, because they're so short. Um, and it was I did one exactly at, like at 12:01, not exactly at midnight, but right after. It was really beautiful, really, really beautiful. And called in a lot of intentions, had some visitations. I think Ram Dass came to visit me, which was really nice. Saw his face swirling around in his voice, which was really cool. Um, yeah, and it was just a nice way to, seal the year and bring in a new year. This last year was full of a lot of firsts for me, a lot of growth edges. My first book came out in last April. And with that came, a tremendous amount of pride, of course, and so proud that I got a book out, and got it published, and it's been received very, very well. But also had to kind of make friends with sort of the challenges of the material world and support from the publisher and things like that, or lack of support from the publisher, so to speak. So it was an interesting year for sure. Um, but yeah, so really good to be with everyone. I think this is the third or fourth fireside chat that we've done. So good to see so many familiar faces and a few new ones as well. Um, I've been doing these about once a month, give or take, maybe once every 6 weeks. Everyone is on a different topic. This one is entitled The Yoga of Psychedelics. Um, should you have an idea of a topic that you would like me to explore and for us to explore as a community, please, by all means, say so. Yeah, this is the third. Yeah, the first one was on psychedelic churches, risks and rewards of psychedelic churches. I really believe they're kind of like the Wild West of the modern psychedelic movement, um, for better and for worse. And then we did addiction and psychedelics. Um, so I've been really kind of curating topics and discussions and making some slides that around this topic as well, around things that are really close to me, things that I, have a lot of direct experience with, things that I'm very passionate about. Psychedelic churches was one. I'm a recovering addict and consider myself to be in recovery, so that's why we did the addiction and psychedelics one. And yeah, and that's really just a fascinating intersection of the modern psychedelic movement and psychedelic history too. Psychedelic assisted therapy, really in its earliest nascent stages in the 50s, was tied to alcoholism support, and today we see so many interesting breakthroughs happening. And the yoga of psychedelics, the two. I wouldn't say just the two, but two of my primary um, paths in life, two primary tentacles of knowledge, self-care, introspection, devotion, exploration, and healing and spiritual contact are in yoga and in psychedelics. And I do think there's kind of an intersection between, these two paths in a formal way as well. And when I speak about yoga and when I'm using that term, analogy, that word yoga, which means in Sanskrit, it means to yoke, means to, union. Um, a union of the senses and of the self and in the material world. I'm not referring to just asana, posture-based exercise practices of yoga. While those are an important arm of yoga, um, they have yoga as it's referred to in the West. I think everybody in this room is already aware of this, but we'll just get it out of the way anyway. And that is not really what yoga is. It's kind of become a commodified term that has been marketed and branded to create a very um, oversimplified concept of what yoga is. Certainly the practice of hatha yoga and asana. It's part of the eight limb system. Um, but it's only one of the eight limbs. And it is a powerful practice for sure, but it is not yoga in and of itself. Yoga in the traditional sense, in India and the science of yoga, really has no centralized system, or really centralized kind of like, authoritative path of dogma and instruction. There are many, many, countless traditions, many, many ways to practice yoga, um, countless kind of combinations of various practices of yoga, kind of depending on the lineage, the region, the teacher, and the guru. Um, and there is no one predominant text. There are many. There's the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, which is really kind of one of the first texts to really break down what the eight limb path is. There's the Bhagavad Gita, the Ramayana, the Vedas, the Puranas, and so on and so forth. I mean, there are an incredible amount of little pathways that you can go down if this is a path that really interests you. And I think about this a lot. And yeah, it kind of comes up in a conceptual and theoretical sense in my mind. Is that psychedelics, the path of psychedelic healing, or contemplation or expansion, exploration is kind of the same as how I just described yoga. Is there is no one way to do psychedelics. There is no one lineage. Um, you know what I mean? There are many, 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 many different indigenous lineages that use specific medicines in a very kind of traditional way that has been carved out through generation after generation after generation. And those cultures do it very beautifully. But even amongst those cultures, it differs tremendously. The practice of doing ayahuasca with the Shipibo tribe is completely different than doing peyote with the Native American church, for instance. You know, um, you might kind of get to a similar place, but the rituals involved and the belief systems around how psychedelics work on the mind, body, and soul really have, they're different. They're very different. And today, in today's modern world of psychedelic growth and expansion, um, I tend to not really call this the psychedelic renaissance and kind of backing away from that term a little bit. Um, because the word Renaissance, kind of by definition, the word Renaissance means to revive something that once was. It's a revival, a renaissance of something that was once lost. And in the West, anyway, I don't think psychedelics have ever really been a part of our culture on a mainstream level. The 1960s flirted with the idea, of course. Um, the proliferation of LSD and cannabis and psilocybin in the 60s certainly reached tremendous numbers. But it really kind of was a counterculture thing, you know. It was something that really belonged to the counterculture and to the hippie movement, quote unquote. And it didn't really leave that culture, subculture too often. Now and then it did. Um, I mean, there's great examples. I mean, like earlier, even before the 60s, guys like Humphrey Osmond or later on, or Humphrey Osmond and Aldous Huxley and even Stanislav Grof later on. You know, I don't really think those guys were counterculture figures, so to speak. Um, but, you know, suffice it to say, it's that what we are seeing with psychedelics today is that there is an incredible amount of activity um, and instruction on how to use psychedelics, you know? And I think for most people, as I've come to learn, when you kind of find something that's sort of working for you, maybe a medicine or a way of doing this that is kind of speaking to you, it's very similar to the yogic path. You know, the yogic path has no one doorway, it has 1,000 doorways. And if you find one that you walk through and speaks to you, and opens up your heart, and that's the one you resonate with, that's the path you go down, you know. But it doesn't mean it's the only path, you know. Um, and you know, that's one thing I really have always resonated with around yoga and Vedanta is the non-duality and that one God, a thousand masks. And you know, that the kind of the disillusion and dissolving of dogmatic rules and regulations around spirituality are much more common in this way of practice and devotion and worship. Um, but even within certain yoga tenets and traditions, there are very strict dogmatic values and ways of practicing it. But but that's okay. You know, we can each find something that works for us. So yeah, I've been just thinking about it a lot. Is that, you know, I think the intersection of psychedelics and yoga kind of begs the question uh, right up front, is the practice and process and experience of using psychedelics as a long-term support mechanism to better and to help heal your mind, body, soul, and connection to spirit. Is that a yoga? Is that a practice? Um, and I think there's a lot of different ways to look at it. Um, And we're going to kind of, I have some slides prepared that I would like to go through and kind of talk about it with you guys. And we'll certainly have plenty of time for discussion and stuff like that afterwards. Um, but one thing I did want to kind of say up front is that, you know, I've given this talk, a talk entitled the Yoga of Psychedelics in a formal way before, in person, not online. And it was a little bit more formalized, less kind of discussion like we're doing here tonight. Um, and, you know, one question that I always get asked and from people who are, you know, deep into specific spiritual communities, usually Eastern communities that incorporate other form of non-ordinary states of consciousness practices like meditation or other forms of yoga, is the question, well, I kind of feel like I can get to the same place doing meditation, breath work, pranayama, or whatever it is. Then I don't really need psychedelics. I don't really need that. And I feel like I kind of view that as a cheat code. I kind of view that as an artificial accelerant to enlightenment. Um, and, it's a very common thread. And I'm sure many people in this room, some of you I know actually, who are deep into spiritual communities have probably encountered that at some point. Um, so, I did want to talk about that before we kind of get into some discussion around the examination of different types of yoga and how they relate to psychedelics. Um, my basic kind of relationship with that topic is straight from Ram Dass. I'm just completely lifting it and stealing it and appropriating a Ram Dass point of view on it. And as Ram Dass said many, many times over his very prolific spiritual career, is that the second you become too attached to a method is when the method no longer serves you. Those of you who have been with me, taken my course, or you've heard me talk about this a lot. It's something I go back to a lot. And the gist of that is if you are grabbing on too tight to the method and have a relationship to it that is too firm and has no elasticity to it, is then when you become attached to the method. And you have to be willing to let methods have a little bit of malleability to kind of work with them and let them go up and let them go down and certainly finding a method or a combination of methods and a spiritual path that works for you, but also being open to continue to grow and evolve and try new things and without any sort of attachment to the idea of like, oh, this is you know, artificial. This is wrong. This isn't pure. This isn't sattvic. This is Rudrasic or whatever. Um, and so that's kind of my answer to it. And I hope everybody knows what I mean when I refer to it like that. I think all methods at some point or another kind of have a point in our spiritual ongoing growth and evolution where we can stand to shake things up a little bit. And the premise in a lot of spiritual communities, not just Eastern ones, and many, many Western Judeo-Christian subsets as well, the idea around the idea around intoxicants, that intoxicants are somehow demonic or a sin or a shortcut or artificial or immoral or something of that nature. Um, I think that is, well, we could do a whole talk for hours, for a good hour at least, on the history of where that idea came from, right? Um, in Judeo-Christian religions, that really started with the Crusades and the Spanish kind of expedition in the 14 and 1500s when, sorry, not the Crusades, but like the Spanish Inquisition and their Spanish colonialism of those years. Um, that is when Catholicism really kind of shifted from not being just a path to God, but also started kind of creating law and a moral framework for how societies, not just the individual, but for how societies should live. And the idea around intoxicants kind of became a little bit black and white. Spanish colonialists who came to Mesoamerica in the 1500s saw what was happening with, in Teotihuacan and the Aztec and Mayan cultures and saw them using the sacred mushroom and viewed it as demonic. They tended to otherize it. They didn't have a quest to understand it. So they immediately just saw that, as darkness and sin and things like that. And this idea of in spirituality and in religion of taking spiritual precepts and fundamental values around spirituality and practices and turning them into a moral code and conduct for how to live your life has included intoxicants, especially in the West, for a number of years now. So I think the idea of immediately, you know, by default, dismissing psychedelics as, pushing them away, saying, "Oh, well, that is artificial. That is drugs. That is not right. That is a shortcut. That is not pure." I think that is wrapped up in messaging and disinformation that really comes from the West primarily, um, and is not something that is really, based in kind of the DNA of most of the world's religions. So much so that even in India, as much affinity and deep love as I have for the ISKCON movement, the Hare Krishna movement, and I do, and I consider them my brothers and sisters. They have a very hard no on intoxicants, on all intoxicants, even coffee, forget mushrooms and ayahuasca. I mean, even coffee, you know. So, this idea of rigidity around this, and I just think I kind of believe it's something that we can loosen up, and we can create spiritual practices that work for us that are free from uh, authoritarian structures that tell us what we can and cannot do to further our own spiritual growth. You know, um, I mean, I'm, in the words of Jerry Garcia, I'm pathologically anti-authoritarian. So I will, that is something that is important to me. Um, and is the very foundation of cognitive liberty, is that we have the freedom as sovereign individuals to change our consciousness as we see fit in any way, shape, or form, as long as we're not harming others. But if there's any path that gets us closer to God or that gets us closer to self-actualization, hey, Godspeed, Mazel Tov, it's great. It's all whatever works. And I think as a community, not just in the spiritual world, but also in the psychedelic community as well, I think it's a good idea to have that attitude for sure. Um, so, as I said at the beginning, two of the primary, kind of intersections of personal growth in my life are bhakti yoga and other forms of yoga too, but bhakti yoga and psychedelics. There are others as well, but focusing on those two primarily. And let's just talk about them for a little bit. I'm going to share my screen, and yeah. Now, there's something weird when I go to my keynote and make it full screen with Zoom. So I'm not going to do that. So you guys will just see the slides on the left and we'll just look at the primary one. And I could hope you can bear with me on that. Um, well, that's us today. Uh, Um, as always, I think everyone in this room, I have so many familiar faces tonight, which was really great to see. Many people have already taken my course. If you haven't, please head over to zachleary.net and check it out. And many of you also have also journeyed with me as well. I see that in the room. And if you're interested in that, please send me an email and we can talk about that as well. So let's just do a little recap on different types of yoga, just to kind of set the stage here a little bit. Um, there are, four primary pillars, so to speak. Jnana yoga. which is the yoga of knowledge and wisdom. Um, Kind of the path of intellectual inquiry and realization, the core question often asked in those texts, who am I? The Upanishads are very common in the path of jnana yoga, as is Vedanta, self-inquiry, discrimination between the real and unreal. The goal, loosely, is to realize the identity of Atman equals Brahman, means the self is the same as Godhead. Traditionally associated with Advaita Vedanta, which means non-dual. Um, so when it relates to the various types of yoga, I find, jnana yoga is, relies heavily on spiritual texts and the analysis of very heady concepts and of spiritual kind of tenets and kind of are often surrounded in discussion. But the core question of who am I, I think that is one of the most predominant um, themes that will come up in any psychedelic experience. Who am I? Bhakti yoga, the yoga of love, service, and devotion. I pretty much consider myself to be a bhakta, although with all the yogas, jnana yoga, raja yoga, bhakti, I certainly incorporate various aspects of them all, but bhakti yoga primarily is my main path through the lineage of Ram Dass and Neem Karoli Baba. Um, my Ishtadevata, for those of you who are curious, is Krishna primarily, then Hanuman as well, but really Krishna. That is the path of love, service, surrender, and devotion to God. But when we say devotion to God, it means of devotion to the divine in all things. Um, it is about recognizing the divinity and even the mundane, doing as many acts of service as you can with keeping an eye and your heart focused on the divine, not just the big things, right? Chanting, kirtan, puja, these are all very common practices within bhakti yoga as well. Um, but I think kind of the primary takeaway from bhakti is union and feeling a sense of equanimity with self and with God and with your incarnation, and feeling that through love and grace and through these various practices as well. And I think in the psychedelic experience, if you come through the other end, feeling just a little bit more union and equanimity with yourself and your immediate surroundings and your relationships, then it was a successful experience. Karma yoga, which is the yoga of action, loosely, service, selfless action, and seva. Seva, though, when we talk about service and seva in this tradition and all the yogic traditions, it means service without expectation of acknowledgement or reward. You are doing it to purify the ego and the mind and to serve God, right? Um, Comes up a lot in the Gita. Raja Yoga. Um, with all of these, though, there are kind of many splinter yogas that fall underneath them, things like Tantra, here, Ashtanga Yoga, the Eightfold Path. In a traditional sense, it falls under Raja Yoga, which is the path of mental discipline and meditation. Patanjali's Yoga Sutras really emphasize this. And when you see the Eightfold Path laid out, that is an entire lifelong practice in and of itself. Um, and as we see, as we were talking about earlier, asana is just it's the third of the eight limbs, not all by itself. Um, But what's really good about Raja Yoga, it is, when you go through the eight limb process and the cycle of the eight limbs, um, going into niyama and observances, into asana, into moving your body and pranayama and understanding your breath and contemplation. And even if you do have just a glimmer of landing in samadhi, which means, a place of spiritual realization, a place of ecstasy, um, is that you can learn through these practices, how to observe your thoughts and how to observe your thoughts without attachment and without judgment. And this is a very important aspect of using psychedelics, I believe. Um, we talk a lot about, what to do when certain thoughts come up, if the medicine is taking you in a certain direction that perhaps you don't really, or I should say, weren't planning on going to, but it's taking you there anyway. And it could be something very, very difficult to have a look at. When you do incorporate pranayama, breath work, and niyama observances, and just kind of general body, breath, soul awareness, I tend to think that you can be in more of a surrendered state to where the medicines can take you, even if it gets very, very difficult. Um, because at some point, it will get difficult. That's an unavoidable reality of the psychedelic experience. And we're not talking about microdoses here, by the way. We're talking about larger doses. It's an unavoidable part of it. Um, so, yeah, so loosely, those are the four types, four main kind of trees of yoga: jhana, bhakti, karma, and raja. But many other practices fall under them, specifically tantra, which is a very beautiful practice because it does also incorporate body awareness and body divinity, and not looking at the body as just kind of this empty vessel for incarnation, but as something that is kind of sacred while we're here at this time on Earth. So the practice of Tantra is a really beautiful one as well. Um, different paths, all of these different yogas, it really doesn't matter. It's whatever one kind of speaks to you, different lineages, gurus, teachers may kind of lean on one more than the other. But what is kind of, an intersection that I see here between a realized yogic practitioner and a realized psychedelic practitioner is karma, is being aware of your actions, right? Which is karma yoga. Karma is sometimes it's oversimplified in the West, and that like if you do something bad will happen to you later on, right? That's a oversimplified view of it. That it's kind of true, but the nuances, the subtleties of it are much more important, meaning that right action, which leads from right thought and right awareness, but right action really does ripple all across your surroundings and in your immediate vicinity. So by practicing karma yoga, which means right action, right behaviors, right speech, um, is, I think it's for me, the analysis of where my right actions fall into place and where they need a lot of work is one of the most predominant themes in my psychedelic journey, journeying and career, my psychedelic career, um, is really having a look at that, right? And it becomes very, very noticeable in the psychedelic experience, where I feel in alignment with my actions, what feels good, what feels right and pure and in equanimity, and what feels selfish, what feels greedy, what feels lustful, and finding the balance between that. Bhakti, which is coming to a place of devotion, coming to a place of whatever devotion looks like for you. It doesn't have to be in Eastern practices or worshiping Krishna, Hanuman, Buddha, whatever, just kind of finding something that can cultivate your heart space and take you out of the thinking mind. Jhana, wisdom, you know. I can say, I don't know about you guys and would love to hear, but I certainly feel that my psychedelic use has made me wiser. I think I don't feel like that's too much of an egocentric thing to say. I kind of feel like that's pretty real. Um, it has made me wiser. Um, it's definitely made me kind of see and have a relationship to the various attachments and non-attachments in my life and kind of having relationships with them, which puts things in kind of in their right place, as opposed to, my 24-year-old self, which was making huge melodramas out of the most mundane little aspects of every little thing, you know. And I do find that psychedelics and my spiritual practice has made me a little wiser. Um, but when it comes to meditation, the mastery of the mind and a mastery of the senses, when we talk about jhana yoga or raja yoga, I really think that is the primary preparation and integration tool is to be in meditation and to be in a place of observation of your thoughts and your senses and learning how to be with them as they arise and as they fall, right? So, when we can do deep, deep, deep analyses on all of these different arms of yoga, all these different paths and forms, but they are really leading us to the same place, you know? And why I'm kind of keep coming back to psychedelics in this is because I think psychedelics are very powerful tools for illuminating all of these various arms of the yogic path, right? Um, so when we are in a practice of grounding, intention setting, right? Self-awareness and compassion towards self and others, and this also means in like the preparation stage, being in the preparation stage of a psychedelic experience is having a tremendous amount of self-awareness and compassion towards yourself. It means that you are stopping to reflect and being very as honest as you possibly can be about what you would like to transpire in the upcoming journey. And that is a very compassionate act towards yourself and to others too. If you are perhaps in throes of behavior or healing, a need of healing that is affecting others as well, right? And all of these can result in supporting emotional clarity and personal transformation. Um, any questions, thoughts, anything like that? Okay. Um, so my before we're gonna look at some things from the Bhagavad Gita, some actual shlokas. Um, And these are some that I couple that I picked out and some that I kind of got inspired again to find online. But I've been reading the Gita a lot again lately, as I do throughout my life in various phases. First did when I was a teenager. Um, And the reason that we're going to go into the Gita and we went through these formal explorations of the four different kind of pillars of the yogic structure is because I think that they are perhaps mistakenly, or maybe not mistakenly, who knows, um, very sound instructions for the psychedelic experience. Very, very sound instructions, right? Um, And that is why I'm kind of really playing with this idea and kind of keep bringing it back to, um, you know, is the practice of using psychedelics a supportive tool for the practice of yoga? You know, I'm not so sure that psychedelics in and of themselves are a sustainable method. As we'll talk about later when we talk about Ram Dass's journey, which is always a very good one to kind of fall back on. Um, but I think a lot of what's so interesting about if you read like the Gita or the Upanishads, um, or texts like that, is that they really provide a lot of focus into the subtle energies of the human experience, you know, not just the big kind of obvious stuff, but the subtle energies of being in right relationship with some form of self-actualization or self-realization, Um, I mean, it takes a lot of time and a lot of work, and progress can be very, very slow. But I think over the course of time, and if you stay involved, stay disciplined to some extent with a regular spiritual practice, you become a lot more aware of the subtle energies of what's happening in your time here on Earth. Um, so the Bhagavad Gita does mention most of the different yogas by name. And these are ones that I kind of find tie into a desired state of being in the psychedelic experience, if that makes any sense. Of a place that you can rest in the psychedelic experience no matter what is happening, no matter what's coming up for you, no matter how big it is, no matter how difficult it is, no matter how joyful it is, whatever it is. But Krishna says in chapter 2, established in yoga, perform your actions, Arjuna, abandoning attachment, remaining even-minded in success and failure. Evenness of mind is called yoga. So this is what we were talking about earlier. Abandoning attachment, remaining even-minded in success and failure. This is a really, really important concept to bring into psychedelic healing, right? Um, and I will preface it by saying that this is not a way to spiritually bypass very big feelings or sadness or even trauma. You do if you feel called and that is your path to heal your traumas with the aid of psychedelics, coming head on to them and acknowledging their pain and how much suffering it has caused you and maybe even others. That this is definitely all very valid. But when you are observing it, whatever it is in the psychedelic space, if you can do that while being in abandoning attachment and remaining even-minded in success and failure. And you could substitute those words, remaining even-minded in joy and sorrow and happiness and sadness and despair and fulfillment and so on and so forth, staying even-minded and observing them with as much evenness as possible. In chapter 3, Krishna says, therefore, always perform the work that must be done without attachment. By performing action without attachment, one attains the supreme. Therefore, always perform the work that must be done. We can translate this, and what I translated it to, or kind of where I ended up with this one, and as it relates to karma yoga, is integration. Um, and my next version of this deck, I'll put the psychedelic correlation in there as well. But is integration, is knowing the work that needs to be done after the experience and stepping into it. I mean, this is classic Eastern spirituality. What do you do before enlightenment? Chop wood, carry water. What do you do after enlightenment? Chop wood, carry water. I think psychedelics are very powerful tools for painting pictures of what needs to be done to make our life more fulfilling and more wholesome, more holistic afterwards, after the journey. Um, what you do with that information, that's entirely up to you. Psychedelics certainly can't thrust you into action magically. Um, and for a lot of us, they don't. I mean, that is a fact, you know. Doing the work afterwards can be incredibly daunting because you are given so much information. You are given sometimes such a clear picture of what you need to do to move forward that it can be overwhelming. Um, all throughout the Gita. Um, Krishna talks about bhakti yoga, fixing your mind on me, the divine, be devoted to me, the divine, worship me, bow to me, thus uniting yourself with me, you shall come to me. You know, um, in this shloka, what kind of stood out for me was uniting yourself with me, uniting yourself with God, with the divine. All the world's religions have an aspect of this. In Christianity, the kingdom of heaven is within. It means that the divine can be a resting place, a respite inside of you, a repository inside of you that you don't have to go searching for externally all the time. The external dances with God, hey, they're fun. Sometimes we need them. They're great reminders. I mean, I go to temples all the time. Even here in Austin, I go to temples. There are Hindu temples all around me here and in India. And it's a great way to hang out with the external form, the personified form of Godhead with others in community. Um, but ultimately, I think the reminder is that they're right there with us all the time. Um, Krishna also says, one who serves me with unwavering bhakti yoga transcends the three gunas and becomes fit for Brahman. This can get a little esoteric when we're talking about the gunas, sattva, tamasic, and rajasic, and those various qualities of spiritual, the actual like fundamental nature of what it is that you want to gravitate towards too, which is a sattvic lifestyle and what that means. So this is getting a little esoteric, but still interesting nonetheless. Um, yeah, we already kind of, well, that one is a little redundant. Yeah, I consider them to be the highest yogis. Sort of. But so yeah, Krishna contrasts action with knowledge, then integrates them, right? Um, in this world, there is nothing as purifying as knowledge. One perfected in yoga realizes this knowledge within oneself in due course of time, right? So when you're perfected in the practice, I mean, the word perfected, I don't really if I could rewrite the various translations of the Gita, I would take out the word perfected because I don't think any of us are ever perfected in the practice of yoga. Um, Nor should we strive for perfection. I think we should strive to do the very best that we can. But when we are in depth in relationship with process and with our spiritual path, then we realize the knowledge within ourself. And psychedelics are very, very, again, very powerful tools for illuminating what we already have inside of us that has gone dormant. You know, that is a very common thing that I see in others when I facilitate and within myself, is that all the various attributes and huge well springs of knowledge that I have within myself. Um, to lead a better, more fulfilling life. What is it that gets in the way of me tapping into those things on a regular basis? In various times in my life, there are very obvious things like drug addiction, but what are the subtle energies that got me to that place um, in the first place? Um, the faithful one, devoted and self-controlled, attains knowledge. Having attained knowledge, one quickly attains supreme peace. In this chapter, also, it goes on to say a lot more about knowledge, not just intellectual knowledge, but knowledge of the self, um, and knowledge of the self's relationship with yoga, that you can attain supreme peace. Um, okay. And this is the last one. Let a man lift himself by the self. Let him not degrade himself. The self alone is the friend of the self, and the self alone is its enemy. The self alone is the friend of the self, and the self alone is its enemy, right? Again, another really powerful metaphor to take into the psychedelic experience when you're exploring the multiplicity of ourselves, in IFS, we can use capital S self and all of our various parts. Um, but if you look at yourself as an island, and just floating out there alone, on kind of a sea of separation is when you lose true connection to the self. And I think that's what Krishna is talking about here. Um, so, any questions, comments here? Okay. Um, what I wanted to turn to is to kind of like bring all of this discussion around the formal kind of dives into various aspects and qualities of yoga, both on the internal and external forms, is to talk about some case studies, specifically Ram Dass and Alan Watts, which are both very unique case studies in and of themselves, right? Um, There's a lot of you in here, I think, who have taken my course and you've heard this story a million times. So I'm going to just say it again, but I use it very often when talking about, and it's very fitting when talking about the yoga of psychedelics and how to incorporate psychedelics as part of your larger spiritual practice, right? Um, so if you've heard the story, you're just going to hear it again. I'll try to make it quick, but before Ram Dass went to India, when he was Richard Albert, he was living in the gatehouse in Millbrook, taking LSD every single weekend, and became so insanely frustrated with the act of using psychedelics as a method in and of themselves without any spiritual foundation underneath it, right? What happened there was, before he was still Richard then, this sensation of coming down ultimately became a zero-sum game. And he thought it wasn't sustainable. And he called Timothy up and said, Timothy, we failed. You have to come down. You can't stay in that place. And if you can't stay in that place, what good are any of these tools? What's the point? So in tremendous frustration, he threw up his hands, left the gatehouse in Millbrook, and went to India. A few months later, he was in India. He met Neem Karoli Baba. You guys all know the story. It's written about ad nauseum. But he met Neem Karoli Baba, and what was supposed to be a 2-week trip to India turned into a 6-month trip, and he came back Ram Dass. Um, the point of it is he met his guru, Neem Karoli Baba, who gave him a new map of consciousness and introduced him to these other methods that support the exploration of non-ordinary states of consciousness that have nothing to do with psychedelics. And those methods and this other map of consciousness that he was gifted was something he was unaware of in the West. In 1967, not many of us knew about the Gita or the eight limb path of yoga or even what pranayama was or the term mindfulness hadn't even been come up. We didn't even know what that was yet in 1967. So, for Ram Dass or for Richard, it was exactly what he'd been looking for the entire time. It was the missing ingredient that changed his whole life. Um, and Ram Dass's karma is very unique in that he got something from Neem Karoli Baba and got something from these Eastern practices that most of us don't get. And I'm not saying that to be self-deprecating or anything like that. But I do think that in some respect, Ram Dass was kind of a realized being in a way, and being in this right place at the right time and, you know, crossing paths with Neem Karoli Baba and just being introduced to this whole new way of life. It was his karma, it was his karma. He was also a messenger, you know, and the divine, if you want to call it the divine, the guru's grace, whatever, you know, instilled with him this amazing knack to bring these teachings back to the West and spread this wisdom, So, I'm just saying that because, I think Ram Dass's karma was so profound in his relationship with this stuff that um, I think from time to time, I certainly feel like I get little sprinkles of pixie dust that feel like, oh, wow, I'm really onto something here from time to time. And in my life, that's enough. Um, but, right away, he got into these practices and doing all of these things, reading all these texts, doing yoga, doing meditation, doing pranayama, and changing his diet and getting in touch with his sattvic side and really purifying himself. He distanced himself from psychedelics for a minute there, but not for very long. Then by 1970, he brought psychedelics back into his repertoire. But what was so fascinating about that was that because he had this underlying bedrock of a foundational relationship with this other spiritual path, the psychedelic experience no longer felt like this roller coaster of coming up and coming down. He had something to fall back on and use psychedelics as just this way to temporarily expand. And when you can contract, you're contracting and falling back on these fundamental practices already. So I think Ram Dass is a really beautiful example of using psychedelics as a yoga, you know, and not distinguishing one from the other and looking at the path of Dharma as something that you get to co-create with your God, whatever speaks to you, you know. And it doesn't have to be any one thing, and that's really the path of Dharma. So I think Ram Dass is a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful example of that. Um, and yeah, I mean, what else can we say about that, Um, I think kind of getting off topic a little bit here, but when I do think about this, I mean, Ram Dass had also had the gift of living a long life. He died just 6 years ago, like two weeks, it was 6 years. Timothy died, um, almost 30 years ago now. It's been a really long time. And I'm mentioning that because I really think, Timothy's relationship with using psychedelics was so based in the mind, was so based in the intellectual fireworks of using one's gifted intellect to further his path of what he thought was enlightenment. Um, But, again, just like how, I was talking about Ram Dass had an incredible karma in that, he was gifted this yogic grace from Neem Karoli Baba. Timothy also had the same sort of karma in that his intellect was incredible, and most of us don't have, kind of don't hang out in that place from time to time. So When I go back and I read Timothy's kind of riffs on the psychedelic experience, I do see early on, he dabbled in Eastern spirituality and the Tibetan Book of the Dead and the psychedelic experience and things like that. But afterwards, it was getting very, very heady and kind of devoid of the heart space as well, which is, it's kind of an interesting thing. But yeah, it doesn't really relate to this talk. But when we were reading the bit about jhana yoga and the path of knowledge and intellectual curiosity as a path of enlightenment, I was really kind of thinking about Timothy. Yeah. Um, so moving on to Alan Watts. Alan he's a fascinating case study. I love Alan Watts. God, he is just so brilliant. And if you listen to any of those talks, there's endless amounts of them on YouTube. And when I grew up, on Sunday nights on KCRW radio in Los Angeles. They would play this guy named Joe Frank, followed by Alan Watts on the radio every Sunday night. And in high school, we'd trade tapes and listen to them. And Alan Watts played such a pivotal role in my growth. And he said, if you get the message, as it relates to psychedelics, by the way. If you get the message, hang up the phone. For psychedelic drugs are simply instruments like microscopes or telescopes. Alan also said that consciousness is a disembodied plane and our minds are receivers, are like antennas that can tap into consciousness and come up with a sense of perception. But that consciousness does not reside in our brains in and of itself. If you die, does consciousness cease to exist? Not so much. I don't think so. No. We have the ability as humans, and Alan was pointed this out beautifully, to tap into these spheres of consciousness. And if you use psychedelics like a telescope or a microscope to go inward, microscope, telescope, outward, external, that you can certainly tap into very profound planes of consciousness awareness, of an expanded sense of awareness around consciousness. Um, and when it comes to Alan, and I love Alan Watts, this is not a judgment at all. Please don't take it this way. But Alan Watts basically died of alcoholism. He basically drank himself to death. Um, and I often wonder a lot about that. And as someone who's in recovery and almost did die myself, I do wonder about that, how somebody who is gifted such a profound sense of articulation around non-ordinary states of consciousness wasn't able to translate it into the human experience. So it's kind of an interesting case study for sure. But I think Alan's early or kind of mid to late 60s lectures on LSD as it relates to Buddhism and Hinduism and yoga are just core tenets of how to use psychedelics wisely, and how to use them with kind of a sense of equanimity, and not using them as just this shortcut to rush to peak experience, which is something that I think a lot of people did in the 1960s, really chased peak experience a little bit too high. So are psychedelics a yoga in and of themselves? You know, yes and no. I think no, I don't think psychedelics are a method in and of themselves. You cannot use psychedelics regularly enough in a safe and harm reduction kind of unified manner to use them as an ongoing spiritual method. So in that way, they are not a yoga. They are not a practice. Um, Unlike meditation, which is something you can do all the time, every day, anywhere, no matter what. Um, but as a tool of expansion, can you still, no more slides. can you use psychedelics to expand your relationship with your various yogas that you may or may not practice? And I think the answer is a wholehearted yes. And that is exactly why I was going through the various kind of just bullet point top level explorations into the various um, pillars of yoga, the various types of yoga, and showing how they intersect with the psychedelic experience on such a profound level, you know. So to me, it is one of the same, with kind of the risk being that you cannot, if you use psychedelics as a method in and of themselves, you will tend to get absorbed in the sensation of chasing peak experience, which is something that I would really encourage everyone to use psychedelics to be very cautious about, because that can be a very seductive trap, to say the least. So there we have it, the yoga of psychedelics. Any questions, comments, concerns, disagreements, supporting agreements, questions, anything?
I have a question.
Hmm.
Um, as far as how to best do you have a way or a suggestion for how to best go through the psychedelic healing journey? Is it a retreat? Is it with a practitioner that you work with regularly? Maybe a little of both?
Well, I would start by answering that depends what you're going into it for. Gwen, is it?
Yeah.
Hi, Gwen. I mean, are you going in for it for like deep healing? Is it trauma related or like anything like
Yeah.
that? Yeah,
Yeah.
a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, because that's a big difference. I mean, if you're
Okay.
going into it for just say, I'm spiritually curious and whatever. But no, if you've got some heavy stuff to work on, um, I recommend not starting in a retreat. I recommend starting with a facilitator, a one-on-one facilitator. The reason for that is retreats, as beautiful as they can be, and they certainly can be, I've facilitated many of them, have a tremendous amount of transference and countertransference. And that the energy of the group and everybody else's experience can seep into yours. So I wouldn't start with a retreat. I would start with finding a practitioner and starting there, in kind of a one-on-one setting to where you can explore yourself and just yourself without the seeping other energies. But then, if you do want to go to a retreat setting, that can also be um, okay too. But yeah, that's my recommendation.
Appreciate that. Thank you. Yeah,
Mhm.
very helpful.
Mhm.
Thank you.
And if you need help finding someone, you just send me an email. Happy to help point you in a direction. Hmm. Any questions? Trip?
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, thanks for having this as always. Yoga is definitely one of my weaker points, but I learned a lot tonight, so thank you for that. Um, yeah, I wanted to make a note that I almost missed it here today. I saw your email the other day, and
Hmm.
apparently my alarm didn't go off today, or I didn't set it for the right AM or PM.
Oh,
And just a few days ago, Matthew Johnson told me to watch Nice Dreams. And so my girlfriend and I, we'd sat down to watch Nice Dreams, and then the intro is like starring Timothy Leary.
yeah,
And I was like, wait a minute, I think tonight is that. And it was literally 6:01 p.m. And we hopped in here just in the nick of time. But
nice.
so synchronicity there, I guess. But yeah, I really enjoyed it.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And I did get a suggestion from someone else. So I'll put this in future emails, but I'll put like an actual iCal click on it and I'll add it to your calendar in the emails so people don't have to do that. It can be helpful, I guess. Robert.
Hey, Zach. With Ram Dass's journey, I feel like I've obviously meeting Pearly Baba was a huge part of that journey and
Yeah.
his miracle that he had like the first or second night. I guess what I don't understand in the yoga practice is like what is the role of a guru? Because like the stories I hear about a guru and people like Ram Dass just devoting themselves to the guru and doing whatever the guru says. I guess I just don't understand. I feel like I'm missing something there. Um,
Mm.
I don't know. Do you have any insight or thoughts on like the role of a guru in yoga practice?
Yeah, no, it's a very good question, and also a complicated one in the 21st century. In that, the idea of the guru system um, has been greatly perverted. We hear so many stories of gurus sexually abusing followers, taking people's money, and kind of so many, the whole false prophet kind of thing. Um, and it is tremendously problematic, there's no question about it, and can also lead to, cults of personality and things like that. Um, Generally speaking, on a very general kind of ambiguous level, um, all of the great gurus and saints in Indian culture anyway, none of them said they were a guru. None of them, they don't go around saying, "Oh, I'm a guru, follow me." They just are there and they shine like the sun and people come organically. Um, and guys like Neem Karoli Baba and Ramana Maharshi and Muktananda, all these guys, they were people just started following them randomly. They never said, "Hey, follow me and do this and do that." They just kind of shone like the sun. But to answer the question specifically from a traditional standpoint, a guru is a teacher who initiates you into a specific spiritual lineage. So, in most Indian cultures, gurus usually are like the patron saint of a neighborhood, of a geography. So if you live in a specific part of India, there's sort of like that region's guru, and he's that region's kind of spiritual master who is there to give you instruction and to inspire you and to help remind you on various methodologies to bring you closer to God. So that is to answer the question directly. That is the purpose of a guru. It is a teacher. It is someone who can, you know, cut through your bullshit and bring you straight to source. Um, and traditionally speaking, most gurus, at least in olden days, there are still a few around today, not too many, but there are some who are just ascended spiritual masters, and have whatever karma. I mean, they're just men and women, they're not anything other than that, but their karmas were such, where they kind of took to these practices in ways that few of us really get to, like even with Ram Dass. I mean, I knew Ram Dass very, very, very fucking well. And I knew Ram Dass as just Richard, as just a man, who had all of his flaws and humanity and little idiosyncrasies, that he was just a grumpy old man, or sometimes even a grumpy, pervy old man. But he was also a spiritual master who at times you can look into his eyes and he could transmit something to you that is beyond language. And that is real. It is not the power of suggestion. It is not a hallucination. It happened many times. And yeah, I mean, he was probably a realized being. He got something that was just so special and he could transmit it to others. So that's what a guru does when done right. Ethan.
Yeah, thank you, Zach. I just want to thank you for putting this together. Just kind of got a question. So I mean, I think maybe we all might be of the mind where, some importance of a spiritual practice that are it's kind of coupled with, partnered with psychedelics. But
Hmm.
do you think that there are that I don't want to necessarily use the word success, but do you think that there can be success without implementing spiritual practice? You don't have to join a religion or have to become Buddhist, but
Yeah.
do you not, you don't necessarily have to do meditation, but at least some contemplative practice, some type of, self-awareness, inner kind of practice, not necessarily go full deep into it, into the deep dive.
Yeah. Yeah.
But is there some element of that that kind of leads to success, or can you just have a? Because I know you were saying earlier about being too heady, where Timothy was kind of heady. So is there no success without it, or what do you kind of think here? What's your opinion on that?
Look, I don't think I wouldn't be so bold as to say like there's no success without it. And um, but it sure helps. I would say that, but like you said, which is, thank you for saying it. Look, yeah, you don't have to run off and go join your local Buddhist Sangha or find a guru or run to India or anything like that. That's not what any of this was meaning to suggest. But I do think it's tremendously helpful to have one method, at least one method that you can fall back to when the psychedelic experience is over, that can be contemplative, that can be reflective, that can be peaceful, that can be still, that can help you piece together the transformational properties that you just experienced. In the West, we are very prone to being busy, to doing, to staying constantly in motion and working and doing things like that. We don't allow ourselves much time for contemplation and stillness, and we almost disdain it in a way and look at it as, oh, you're doing nothing, you're not being productive. But I would counter that tremendously and saying I think it's tremendously helpful to have something to fall back on. And it can be in whatever form you want, Ethan. It doesn't have to be Ram Dass's lineage or Alan Watts or Neem Karoli Baba. Whatever works for Ethan is fine. But yes, I think it's helpful. Um, can you do it without it? Oh, probably, but I see more success with people who like in my experience as a facilitator, those who I see achieve the most success with psychedelic experiences are those who have solid meditation practices. I'm just sharing with you the data of the hundreds of people I've sat with, you know. So for
No,
what
that's interesting. Thank you, because I was a meditator before I got into psychedelics. I don't know if you necessarily, if that may be something that plays into it too, but it seems like it kind of merges a road with psychedelics and meditation. But yeah, thank you for that. Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you for
yeah.
that.
Well, okay, guys.
Zach, I have a question for
Yeah,
you.
yeah.
Um, it's Robin.
Hi, Robin.
Is your choice of, and Happy New Year,
Hi, Robin.
and thanks for doing this.
Mhm.
Is your choice of yoga practice based on your goals in spirituality or in psychedelics? Or
What
both?
it is my choice of spiritual practice? Say the last part.
Yeah. Your choice of yoga practice.
Mhm.
Is that because of goals in spirituality or goals in psychedelics or both?
Both and neither. My choice of yoga practice is something that um, hit me kind of just like a lightning bolt in the heart and just pierced right through, you know. And that's just my story. And trust me in that, like I'm a cynic. I don't really subscribe to organized things too well like that. So when my spiritual practice of choice really started to take shape, it's because I was feeling these tremendous benefits from them instantly, this tremendous amount of peace and love and quietness that I hadn't really ever felt in my life. And that's why I choose those. And yeah, now I continue to practice them because they do align with my ongoing spiritual goals. And they also happen to really help the psychedelic experience at the same time. But it was kind of like a chicken and the egg thing. Like, I did discover psychedelics first, then Eastern spirituality. But once I discovered my kind of form of spiritual practice, it was just an immediate life changer, you know. Yeah.
Thank you.
Mm. Okay, guys. Well, thank you so much for being here. Really great to be with all of you guys. As you all know, you can send me an email anytime, zachleary@mac.com. Um, a lot of you in here have already taken my course, and you can work with me privately in Austin should you want to. Just be in touch, and I'm happy to organize that for you guys. And we'll do this again at some time in probably mid-February, after my course is over in mid-February. On what topic, I'm not quite sure yet. If you have um, any suggestions, please let me know. But other than that, you guys, Happy New Year, happy 2026. I hope you guys are all start off the new year with a bang, and sending love to you all. Thank you so much for being here, guys.
Hey, thank you, Zach.
Thank you.